So we are given the following equation and they want us to figure out what is the value of x minus 10. So we need to solve for x. That is the first thing that we need to do, is solve for x, and then afterwards we will find out what x minus 10 is. And so step one, I know the fractions look a little intimidating, but don't let them be. And so just treat them as if they were numbers, as if they were single integers. The first thing you need to do is move the negative 1/2 to the other side. So in order to do that, we're going to add 1/2 to each side. And this right here, minus the half plus 1/2, that's going to give you 0. And so then we're left with 13x over 6 is equal to 5x over 3 plus 1/2. And we cannot combine these two because they are not like terms. So the second thing that we need to do is move the 5x over 3. In order to do that, we're going to subtract it from the right side. And so we're going to go ahead and take out minus 5x over 3 minus 5x over 3. That's going to cancel this one out because it's 0. And so then we end up with 13x over 6 minus 5x over 3 equals 1/2. And so now, third thing that you need to do is combine your fractions on the left side. And so we need to figure out the common denominator first, and then in order to combine them. And so what is the common denominator here? It would be 6. Because all we need to do is multiply this fraction times 2. So we're left with 13x over 6 minus 5x over 3. And you have to multiply 2 on the top and the bottom. And so what do we end up here with here? We end up with 13x over 6 minus 10x over 6 equals 1/2. And so you're wondering, well, how do we know that 2 over 2 times 5x over 3 is still the same number? Well, let me simplify it for you. Let me divide 2 on both the top and the bottom. I'm left with 5x over 3. So it's the same thing. We just need to change the number in the bottom in order to combine the top values here. So now we can combine our top values and we get 13x minus 10x over 6. Again, with fractions, when you adding or subtracting, you have to make sure that they have the same denominator. And once they have the same denominator, you only combine the top values. You don't combine the bottom values. So then we end up with 3x over 6 equals 1/2. And we can simplify this one. 3 over 6 is just 1/2. X equals 1/2. And so now what do we do? How do we get that x by itself? I'm sorry, here let me show you guys how I got 1/2 from 3x over 6. I'm gonna divide top and the bottom by 3, which is just 1/2. So that's how I changed 3 over 6 into 1/2. So now, since I'm multiplying by 1/2, I need to multiply. Since I'm dividing by 1/2, I need to multiply by 2 on each side, the left and the right. So then you're left with 2x over 2 equals 2 over 2, and then these 2's cancel. So 2 divided by 2 is just 1, and this right here would be a solution. And so now that right there is our x. This right here is our solution. So now what do we do with it? Well, if you look back up, the second part of our problem was, what is the value of x minus 10? This right here we already solved, x equals 1. And so now all we have to do for the second part is plug in our x. So what is x minus 10? So when x equals 1, 1 minus 10 equals 9, and so that would be our solution. I'm sorry, negative 9. That would be our solution. And so how do we know that x equals 1 is correct? Well, we can verify by plugging it into the original problem. And so we end up with our original problem was 13 over 6x minus 1/2 equals 5x over 3. And just plug in 1. So 13 over 6 times 1 minus 1/2. 5 times 1 over 3. And that's just 13 over 6 minus 1/2. 5 over 3. We need to convert this one and get the same common denominator as 6. So we're going to go ahead and multiply 3 on the top and the bottom. And then we have the following. 13 over 6 minus 3 over 6 equals 5 over 3. And now we can combine our top values. And we end up with 10 over 6 equals 5 over 3. And we can simplify our 10 over 6 by dividing by 2 the top and the bottom. That gives us, this right here is going to give us 5 over 3 equals 5 over 3. And so therefore it checks out and we were correct.